This video is a compilation of 2024's Hidden History Channel book reviews. It will feature the books Death in Irish Prehistory, Germanic Theology, and Folklore Rising. Despite a rather morbid title, the new book Death in Irish Prehistory was a joy to review. Firstly, this weighty book that clocks in at over 450 pages is beautiful. The pleasing paper quality, matte finish, layout and illustrations are fabulously arty and almost ornamental. But it is more than just a pretty face. There is real substance here, not just in the highly detailed historical information on funerary rites in prehistoric Ireland and the wider world of northwestern Europe, but in the associated content that lifts the academic and archaeological facts off the page. This includes poetry and the aforementioned artwork that, ironically given the book's title, brings this vast swathe of the distant past to life. It is in the treatment of the prehistoric dead that we learn so much about how these people actually lived, what was important to them, what they believed, and how they went about their lives. It might make a fairly odd coffee table book, but it certainly looks like one. This is something that you can dip into to retrieve necessary facts and information, but also a window into a long-lost world that allows the reader to ponder and daydream about the foundations of what brought us here. We see a past that is at once alien and familiar. These people were just like us in terms of their cognitive and in most respects physical attributes, but they were dealt the hand of being born before all modernity, in a time where wood and stone, whittled and knapped with their bare hands, were the tools of the day. It is tempting to see an idyll sometimes when you consider their closeness to nature and intrinsic rhythmic simpatico with the seasons and celestial events. But then the brutality and harshness of their existence brings this notion crashing down. The book is highly detailed with beautiful diagrams showing the different types of tombs and megalithic memorials. It is also a thought-provoking work that challenges the way prehistory is seen. The great arcs of prehistoric historiography as covered here, the Mesolithic, Neolithic, Bronze Age and Iron Age, are often seen, as the book calls it, in economic terms. But these periodic pigeonholes were blurred at the margins and were geographically inconsistent. Yes, there was a trend from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle towards farming as the Mesolithic ended and the Neolithic began. But, as the book says, then came the recognition that the switchover in subsistence was more complex and drawn out in some cases, with wild food supplies continuing to play a significant role in people's lives. This prompted a shift in the focus of discussion in recent years to consideration of the transition as involving new ideas, new relationships between humans, animals, things and their environment, the building of monuments, and the active use of a wider range of materials, notably pottery and stone tools, sometimes obtained from particular sources and specific locations. Monuments to contain the remains of selected individuals were central to the transformation. The dead in this ancient world are able to tell us this through isotopic analysis and aDNA studies. As one might expect, the book looks into grave goods deposited with the deceased to honour them or for their use in their onward journey. It also delves into the ways in which bodies were positioned and which direction they faced, or whether they were inhumated or cremated. This shows deep cultural traditions based on beliefs in the treatment of the dead, and we can extrapolate that these shared values extended to many aspects of the lives of prehistoric people from birth to death. But the dead were not always so delicately disposed of. There are detailed accounts of so-called bog bodies, which raise the grim spectre of one aspect of ancient life that did not honour the dead: human sacrifice. The book includes images of these which I won't reproduce here as this platform is not keen on them, as I know from previous experience, but it also helpfully includes well-rendered diagrams. The book poses a tantalising and troubling possibility in the placement of these Iron Age sacrificial offerings. Deposited as they were in bogs, liminal spaces linked to the other world, were they put there to expedite their journey to the other side, or was this a more sinister punishment? Was it to ensure that they would remain forever in a state of limbo, forced to be the restless dead? Elsewhere there are some lovely flourishes in this book, such as the aforementioned poetry, which brilliantly complements the academic work. It lifts these skeletons off the page, makes them flesh and makes them human. You see yourself looking back at you across thousands of years of history. One such poem by Una Mannion is included. It is called Crouched Burial. It reads, "They move the earth with small trowels and brushes, and all week the seals sing a desolate chorus as if for you. First a small child's foot, slow sweeps of the brush across your small bones, your shape in the ditch taking definition, a slow birth in the corner of the field by the water's edge. You are lying on your side, knees pulled into your chest, the thin bones of your arms holding yourself without your hands. Your heavy head bent low towards your small body, a comma in the earth. Like an ultrasound picture of the earth's womb where you lay crouched for years. Beside your ribcage, a single blue glass bead, for your ear a bronze ring, your grave gifts. If flowers and herbs cradled your head, they are dust now. Someone brought you here and laid you down with care, your death a secret, your story buried. In the moon bay, at the edge of earth where they found you, the midden shells lay a time like growth rings. Now is our turn on the surface of time, you and your buried bead, prehistory, before there were written words to remember with. A sequence of milk teeth along the bone of your jaw, the buds to permanent teeth spell your age. You are 18 months old. Your bones in the midden are a mystery. Iron Age people did not bury their dead, bodies were left to wind or wolves or water, but not you. Perhaps touching your cold cheek, your mother could not abandon your body to the night, and here, where the land juts out towards the sea and the tide moves, a place she might find you again, she brought you. I recently had the opportunity to review the new book Germanic Theology Volume 1, Poetic Edda, The Lays of the Gods, by Tristan Powers. Now, when reviewing books, before reading them properly, I like to flick through and look at anything that catches my eye, and it was in doing so that I noticed that the sound was reminiscent of one of those Gideon's Bibles that you get in hotel room drawers. And this isn't some banal observation, and that's not to say that the pages are as thin as those, but it was just a feeling that I had. And in many ways this is a Bible, but one which explains and articulates a religion that is very different to the one expressed in the secreted Gideon tomes. It is a religion that, in one form, had its embryonic first flourishing in the steppes, before elements of it found their way to what seems like its most natural habitat, northwestern Europe. Now paganism, particularly the Germanic and Norse varieties, is growing rapidly, and this feels like the perfect guide for would-be adherents to turn to. Personally, I have little interest in organised worship one way or another, but this book's usefulness and intrigue does not end with those who do. That said, I was pleased to see a dedication inside to Freya and to her brother the, to use distinctly un-Germanic terminology, hyperphallust Yngvi Frey. The more I learn about Freya, the more I understand and appreciate the allegorical significance and purpose of this deity, even though I often find myself more drawn to the rhythmic frenzy of Odin's spear dance. I think the resurgence of paganism is due to the increased atomization of people, the Fimbulwinter-like state when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship, an hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down, as Aragorn calls it in the heavily Norse mythology-inspired The Lord of the Rings. That, and the fact that seasonally and spiritually Germanic and Celtic mythology just seems increasingly to fit, both in Northern Europe and among those who adhere to this focused revival in North America. But, as I hinted at, there is plenty to interest the mere casual reader in this comprehensive book. Whilst I think the book is some way short of being a theology, as the title suggests, it is a brilliant reference point for the Poetic Edda and the wider philosophical and spiritual framework that underpins it. And, no doubt this was Powers' intention, I found it unputdownable and would catch myself thinking deeply on many aspects and conclusions the book reaches. The book's glossary is also a very useful guide, and I found its value-led and sometimes non-neutral nature to be instructive rather than misdirecting in how to approach the contents. This book fosters a deeper understanding of the historical context of these myths, and an invaluable perspective on the etymology and interconnectedness of the world of Norse mythology with the broader reconstructed Indo-European culture it is derived from. It also offers helpful footnotes that demand highly enjoyable further reading. The reason why I would shy away from saying this was a theology is the early chapter on Voluspa. Now, it is said in the promotional material that the author is a second-generation Germanic pagan, and I wouldn't want to take anything away from him or cast doubt on his sincerely held beliefs, but this book, while fascinating on a number of levels, is not a comprehensive prospectus for adherence to a religion. My primary concern here is in the thorny issue of transcendence. This is brought readily to the fore in the discussion on Ginnunga Gap, one of, if not the main opportunity for a transcendent and explanatory tract for the essence of all being. Rather disappointingly, this is explained in the following terms. The root of the word gin means holy or sacred, and thus the word ginunga gap can be translated as a sacred emptiness, a holy and creative potentiality from which things are given rise. These are not necessarily physical, material things like the earth or waters, for that necessarily comes later. But they are ephemeral and yet nevertheless manifest and incarnate beings, concepts and truths, which includes the Jotnar and the gods, and that which they must necessarily depend upon. It must be noted here that the structure and implication of this Ginunga gap preclude the notion of philosophical transcendence within the Nordic conception of cosmology, as the Ginunga gap physically exists, insomuch as a bowl can be said to be empty, or we can speak of the existence of zero, as a tangible part of the same world into which all other things are born into and exist. Ymir exists in relation to the two worlds of Niflheim and Muspelheim, as are the gods uncovered in the case of Buri, or born in the case of Bor and the rest. We must therefore reject notions of transcendence, that the gods and the heavens rest outside of reality, and accept that they are instead incarnate within them, in overlapping spheres. End quote. A rudimentary search for the notion of theology or God study goes deeper than this. This book is very much an exploration of Norse or Germanic religion, that is to say, a deep and well-written formulation of the culture around observance, but in rejecting transcendence it offers little in theological terms. If this was, and I know it wasn't, the zenith of the offering of my Norse ancestors in terms of establishing meaning, then I'm not surprised that the Eastern Abrahamic religions were a swaying force. My own view is that the cosmological nothingness yet everythingness of Ginunga Gap provides a glimpse into that transcendence. The gods were not those of Greek myth, the Zeus and others in Mount Olympus who wandered down to cause chaos and suffering in the world of men, and were part of that world. I think the originators of this mythology hoped and intended more for their gods. Yes, Odin and the others did interact with the mortal realm, but this was not the norm. That observation takes nothing away from the achievement of the author. This is a great piece of work and one I'll be referring to for years to come. I would absolutely recommend it. I had a powerful sense of déjà vu when I first set eyes on the cover of the wonderful new book, Folklore Rising, by Ben Edge. I recognised that primeval essence, those powerful features and those unmistakable wide curling horns, as well as the vacant haunting stare and the odd indeterminate expression, is it menace or mirth being conveyed by those curled lips? We'll later learn that it may be scorn or mockery. But what was this entity, and where had I seen it before? It was then that I realised it adorned the cover of another book, the seminal, for those of us who are interested in this kind of thing, Folklore, Myths and Legends of Britain, from Reader's Digest. That simple but dazzling gold embossing from 1973 can become etched into your mind, and Ben Edge has captured its essence perfectly in the cover work of this, well, what is it, an art book, a book on folklore, a history book, a travellogue, a diary? In fact, it is all these and more, a fact that becomes apparent by the book's full title, Folklore Rising, An Artist's Journey Through the British Ritual Year. So, what is the beast on the book covers? Well, it is the Dorset Oozer. The venerable Reader's Digest tome speculates that the character was once some kind of fertility god, but is light on detail. Part of this conjecture reads, centuries ago a man wearing the horned mask known as the Oozer may have been a high priest who officiated at a pagan fertility ritual, and the mask may have represented a powerful pagan god. But by the 19th century the Oozer's original meaning had been forgotten, and in places like Shillingstone it had become the Christmas Bull, a terrifying creature which roamed through the streets of Dorset villages at the end of each year, demanding refreshment from any villagers it met. But the Oozer was also potentially used as a shaming device for unfaithful husbands and wives. The Reader's Digest book says, once every Dorset village may have had an Oozer, but by the beginning of the 20th century only one was left, at Melbury Osmond. Now even that has been lost, and the ancient horned god has probably disappeared from Dorset forever. In the 19th century the Oozer almost certainly played a part in a widespread custom known as skimmington riding or skimmity. To express their disapproval of adultery, villagers would troop through the streets, leading a horse or donkey on which two figures, representing a couple suspected of unfaithfulness, were seated back to back. Sometimes models were used, and sometimes a masked man and woman played the parts. The Oozer mask may have been worn by the man, or by one of the crowd, as a particularly damning gesture of derision. A skimmington ride was a form of public shaming or rough justice, primarily in medieval and early modern England and other parts of Europe. It was typically used to humiliate individuals, often men who were seen as being dominated or henpecked by their wives, or those involved in domestic disputes, adultery, or other moral transgressions. The practice was intended as a community-driven way to enforce social norms and punish behaviour considered to deviate from gender or moral expectations. It may have derived from medieval ritual shaming processions called charivari, which also sought to demonise certain undesirable behaviours. Ben Edge's stunning composition features the Usa in the centre with an Usa procession in the background, with horned ritual items and a man blowing a horn. This aspect of the work draws heavily on the Hogarth picture I showed previously that portrays a skimmington ride. The lively work is completed by the presence of the Cerne Abbas giant and dancing Morris men. The artist really brings the Usa entity to life, not just in art, but imagination also, creating a mobile, seemingly three-dimensional procession that ties together a number of folkloric elements from across the centuries. And that is what this book does particularly well. It reminded me of the early living history reenactors, like the pioneering medieval society of the 1960s and 1970s onwards, who learned about how things were by doing them. This practical historian approach applied to art, rather than weapon crafting or fight choreography, leads to new insights and interpretations. This process is introduced in the book as what the author calls folklore activism. Mr. Edge believes that the current resurgence of these folk festivals is a manifestation of ordinary people's desire to find new ways of envisioning community and caring for and connecting to nature and their ancient roots that can anchor them in a changing world. And far from being an accident, the choice of the Dorset Usa as a cover piece seems to be quite deliberate as a homage to the Reader's Digest book from yesteryear. Mr. Edge writes, "Ever since seeing the gold-embossed face of the horned mask on the front of the iconic 1973 Reader's Digest book Folklore, Myths and Legends of Britain, I'd been intrigued to know exactly what it was that I was looking at. After some investigation, I discovered it depicted a mask called the Dorset Usa, now lost to the ages, and of which there were only 2 surviving photographs in existence, taken sometime between 1884 and 1891. The image of the mask is genuinely terrifying, with its 2 large eyes bulging from the page and its demonic half-smile, tufty hair and big sharp horns. It immediately gives you the impression that it has some sort of connection with the occult, maybe black magic. Perhaps this is the reason that this image has endured and survived into contemporary consciousness. Its mystery is immediately intoxicating, terrifying and intriguing." The author then recounts how he attended a wassailing ceremony in Herefordshire where he saw a recreation of the mask named the Darkest Usa, and how this and the associated legends influenced his work. And the book has many such iterations of this hands-on approach, of visiting and observing these arcane rituals and speaking to the locals to gain their understanding of what they mean to inform his own artistic interpretations. I particularly enjoyed the section on the Veil of the White Horse in this regard. It is a great, somewhat investigative journalism-type technique that certainly pays dividends in the striking works of art and fascinating photographs throughout the book. I also particularly enjoyed Mr. Edge's colourful artistic style that appears almost caricature-like, but done with a serious and observant eye. All of the art in this book seems to be saying something, and features accurate and intriguing little callbacks to the lore. The Dorset Usa ceremony is similar in some respects to the Devon event known as the Hunting of the Earl of Roane, which is also presented wonderfully in the book. I featured the particular elements of this ceremony and its potentially mythological influences in a previous documentary, which is linked in the description. This book is effectively a who's who or a what's what of the fascinating parochial traditions of Britain, all presented through Mr. Edge's own experiences, accounts of conversations with people he has met, and through a wonderful collection of over 200 paintings and photographs. Also present are the vegetal Burryman of Scotland, the harvest-themed Straw Bear from Cambridgeshire, and a host of obios or hobby horse traditions. Mythical entities and beasts like the Green Man, John Barleycorn, and the werewolf-like Black Shuck are also all present and correct. And ritually significant locations are also covered, such as the megalithic monuments of Avebury and the Rollright stones. The layout is clear and well ordered, and the writing is accessible, entertaining, and informative. It offers a glimpse into a fairy tale world that scarcely seems real, but is open to all who are willing to reach out and touch it. This is a wonderful book, and one which every aficionado of British folklore and mythology should own and refer to again and again. It really does encapsulate the magic of these events, these entities and places, and the people who carried out these ceremonies for centuries and those who still do to this day. It comes across very much as a tribute to them. Mr. Edge's travels throughout Britain are inspiring and resonate with me personally, as I have made every effort to do similar on this channel. I would absolutely recommend following in his footsteps and seeing more of this amazing country, and I would definitely recommend this book. I hope you enjoyed this compilation of book reviews. I have 2 books to review in due course, but I'm always eager to receive copies of new works focusing on history, mythology and folklore, so please get in touch or leave a comment if you have any new books for review. But for now, that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, share and most importantly subscribe, and you can also support the channel on Subscribestar via the link in the description or via YouTube Super Thanks. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.